The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. The Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere, and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then, what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." The Gospel of the Lord. Today's Gospel begins with a very strange encounter. We hear the Pharisees sent their disciples along with the Herodians. To see a group of Pharisees and Herodians walking together would have been a strange sight, since Pharisees and Herodians were basically on opposing sides. The Herodians, on the one hand, were the supporters, you could even say groupies, of Herod the Great, or by this time, of his son Herod Antipas, the one who'd beheaded John the Baptist. It would be to this same Herod Antipas that Pontius Pilate would send Jesus during his trial, which led to his crucifixion and death. The Herodian dynasty and its supporters owed their rise and continuation in power, not to mention their wealth, to their very public loyalty to and cooperation with the occupying Roman forces. The Pharisees, on the other hand, did not see Roman occupation as a good thing. It was a national embarrassment that God's chosen people, whom God freed from slavery in Egypt, were once again living more or less like slaves under Roman rule. Although the Pharisees chose not to resort to violence like the Zealots, they did see in their religion one last source of national identity at a time when everything else had been taken away from them. So they doubled down on it, focusing on remaining ritually clean, above and beyond what was required for ordinary people in the Old Covenant. They thought every Jewish person should be as ritually clean as the priests who served in the temple had to be. They emphasized things like observing the Sabbath, dietary laws, tithing, things that were unique to God's chosen people and their covenant with the one true God. But also these things distinguished them from the Gentiles, alongside whom and under whom they lived. And so when they showed up and posed their question, Jesus knew immediately what they were up to. This was no casual philosophizing. It was a trap. There were real consequences and eyewitnesses. And it was a religious question. When they asked, "Is it lawful?" they didn't mean legal from the standpoint of Roman law. They said, "Teacher, we know you are sincere, and teach the way of God in accordance with truth." They were asking Jesus whether he thought it was in accord with God's law that God's chosen people should pay taxes to the emperor. This was a religious question. And if it seems a little abstract, perhaps a little history might help. In chapter 5 of the Acts of the Apostles, the Sanhedrin, the highest authority of the Jewish people, met to decide what to do about the preaching of Peter and the disciples after Pentecost. Gamaliel, one of the most respected lead teachers at the time, advised the Sanhedrin to wait and see, reminding them of a certain Judas the Galilean who rose up at the time of the census. Judas the Galilean was considered to be the founder of the Zealots, who did resort to violence, and he started a rebellion at the time of the census, which was done for one reason only, for tax purposes. And it's this same census we hear about every Christmas, when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and Joseph had to go with Mary, who was with child from the Holy Spirit, to Bethlehem to be registered, because Joseph was descended from the house and family of David. Anyways, although Judas the Galilean's revolt was brutally put down by the Romans, as usual, he and his followers made an impression on the people, and his refusal to pay the tax and his reasons for it were known, and it remained on people's minds. Not to mention his followers, the Zealots, still existed in the shadows. So you can imagine if Roman authorities were to hear of a Jesus of Nazareth, remembering Nazareth is in Galilee, that is, of some Galilean who was becoming increasingly popular among the people, and rumor had it he could perform miracles. If this popular, powerful Galilean were to say publicly that paying the census tax was not in accord with God's law, the Herodians would have to report him at once to the Roman authorities to prove their loyalty. But if Jesus said it was in accord with God's law, then the Pharisees could tell people Jesus was actually a compromiser and not the faithful servant of God everyone thought he was. But what was the actual problem with the tax? Besides the issue of paying taxes to foreign invaders, the coin used for the tax was offensive to Jewish sensibilities. As we heard in the Gospel, it's our old friend, the denarius, a day's wage. But it was a Roman denarius that was required for the tax, and the Roman denarius had an image of the emperor on it, as well as an inscription which read, Caesar Augustus Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. It was a claim to be God. This was Judas the Galilean's argument. To pay the census tax using this coin was an act of idolatry. It was supporting this claim. So imagine having to give a whole day's salary to buy a blasphemous coin to pay a tax to some occupying invaders. This was a real question on people's minds. But Jesus knew their question was malicious, and he unmasks the Pharisees for their hypocrisy by having them produce the coin. Show me the coin used for the tax. If they really thought it was against the law of God, they wouldn't carry this coin or pay the tax. Yet they did. But Jesus' answer was simple. He didn't wade into political commentary about the Roman occupiers or even about their taxation practices. He simply pointed out that the coins were the emperor's to begin with, and to give him back what is his is not a religious compromise, nor necessarily agreeing with the emperor's self-proclaimed title on the coin. And yet, Jesus' concern is never just for the things of this world. Their question was about living in accord with God's law, and so he reminds them to give to God the things that are God's. So the question for us in the year 2023 in Kitchener on a Sunday morning is this: what are the things that are God's? I suppose you could say everything. But Jesus in our gospel, I think, invites us to focus on one thing in particular. We hear Jesus say in our translation, whose head is this and whose title? But the Greek word that gets translated there is actually icon, the Greek word for image. And so, if the coin belongs to the emperor because it bears his image, what belongs to God? Whatever bears God's image. In the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 26, the first creation story, we hear, Then God said, Let us make humans in our image, according to our likeness. Let us make humans in our image. You and I, we are made in the image and likeness of God. No other creation, not the sun, the moon, the stars, the day or night, the land or sea, the plants or animals, the sea creatures or birds of every kind, as spectacular and majestic as these all are, none of them was made in the image and likeness of God. They belong to God as his creations, but we belong to God in a special way because we bear his image. Each one of us, not humanity in general, but each one of us individually. Do you believe this? Do you believe that your body, your personality, your limitations, everything about you bears the image of God and reveals who God is somehow to the world. Certainly there are ways in which we obscure God's image, perhaps even on a daily basis, but nothing can ever erase it. As Pope St. John Paul II once said, "We are not the sum of our weaknesses and failures. We are the sum of the Father's love for us and our real capacity to become the image of His Son, Jesus." You and I can choose to do this one thing that only you and I can do, to reveal God to the world, in our bodies, by our thoughts, words, and actions. No one else can do this in the way that only you can. If you choose not to, the world will be that much poorer for it. But if you choose to accept this truth of whose image you are, if you choose every day to honor that, you will see God more clearly in every moment of life, in every person you encounter, and you will be giving to God the things that are God's.